I'm pleased to welcome Matt Richtel back to Google. I say welcome back since he spoke at one of the first authors at Google events in San Francisco about 7 years ago, so we're delighted to have him back. So Matt, as many of you know, is an investigative journalist for the New York Times. He won a Pulitzer Prize in 2010 for his work on the issue of distracted driving. And today he's here to talk about his new book. It's actually not that new, but it's new on paperback, I believe, A Deadly Wandering. We'll do about 20-ish minutes of a presentation by Matt. We'll do some question and answer after that. And there are books in the back for those of you who are here live. Please join me in welcoming Matt.
Thank you, Such. So a quick preface. You mentioned the first book. The first book came out in 2007. And just a brief anecdote about it. It was called Hooked. And a friend of mine, actually right around here, went to a Barnes & Noble and saw it on the front table, sandwiched between a book by Martha Stewart and a Superman anthology. And he was very fired up. Here's his buddy Matt's first book. He takes out his camera phone, goes to take a picture of it, and the clerk comes from behind the desk and says, "Excuse me, sir, what are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm taking a picture of my friend's book." And the guy goes, "You have got to be kidding me. You're friends with Martha Stewart?" Quick question for those of you live. Anybody currently in a bad relationship, or have you been in a bad relationship? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3. Are you in a bad relationship with someone you're sitting next to right now? No. Okay. I am going to propose today that you are in a bad relationship with your phone. It's a lot like your relationship with your high school sweetheart, where it seemed really good, but in retrospect, she or he was a lot more demanding than you realized at the time. You didn't quite fit right. Maybe you needed some time apart to get your perspective back. This is going to be a little bit about the question, is technology addictive? I'm going to get to an answer to that question. It's going to go far afield of the car, which is where my research started in the series that Such alluded to previously on distracted driving. I'm going to talk about your relationship to your phone broadly. There is some really, really remarkable research right now. I think this is a great audience to be discussing in front of. But that said, I'm going to start by just telling you about something that happened in a car, because it is the narrative through line of the book, A Deadly Wandering. It happened on the last day of summer in 2006, and I want you to meet this guy. His name is Reggie Shaw. He looks and is exactly what you see here. He is the veritable all-American kid, and when I say that, he is the good kind of all-American kid, like the nice guy, like A- and B+, not A+. And he played on the basketball team, but was the nice kind of jock, and he really just wanted to fall in love. And he really, really wanted to go on an LDS mission. He lived in the northernmost county of Utah, and he was on his mission in the summer, at the beginning of the summer of 2006, when he felt duty-bound to admit something to the president of the missionary training center. He'd had premarital sex, and he had not come clean about it to his bishop, and had not done the spiritual work, and in the LDS community, that's not okay. And he knew that he would come home humiliated in front of his community. Why do I tell you this seemingly startling and even intimate detail about this young man who was 19 years old at the time? Because this is a guy who's a good guy. He's also a guy who might not tell the truth if he were pressed, like telling his ward bishop that he hadn't had premarital sex when he had to go on his mission. And on the last day of summer 2006, it was September, he was back from his Mormon mission, doing the spiritual work to go back again. And he was driving at 6:30 in the morning on a mountainous road through the northernmost county of Utah. He was going 55 miles an hour, despite the fact that it was the last day of summer. It was starting to rain, freezing rain. And there was a car behind him, a truck carrying 2 tons of horseshoes and horseshoe-making equipment. You guys, this is a missile at highway speeds. And the driver of it is noticing that Reggie, our all-American young man, is occasionally swerving across the yellow divider. Coming the other direction this morning are these 2 guys, Jim Fafaro and Keith Odell. Jim has the beard. They are sincerely, not cliched, they are rocket scientists. They are building the booster for the next space shuttle. They're commuting to work. The guy without the beard, Keith, is known as the genius. He's won the highest safety award from NASA, the Snoopy Award. And the next time Reggie crosses the yellow divider, he clips the Saturn these 2 guys are in. It spins across the road. It is nailed broadside by the guy carrying 2 tons of horseshoes and horseshoe-making equipment. The rocket scientists are dead on impact. I hope you'll pick up the book, A Deadly Wandering. I don't want to circumvent it. I don't want to undermine the drama of it. But what ensues is a remarkable, seminal mystery and investigation. But it is ultimately determined over Reggie's denials that he has texted 11 times in the minutes and seconds around the crash. And it leads to the first criminal trial, certainly in Utah, maybe in the US. So, since that time, I've told you today that we're not going to be talking exclusively about texting and driving, but I want to frame the conversation around that for this very significant reason. If we can text and drive in the car, when we're moving, when lives are at stake, when we know it, what does it say about our behavior the rest of the time? So I want to tell you something here. I want to tell you about a remarkable statistical gap. Currently, these figures are from, forgive me the source, it's the AAA Foundation for Highway Safety, Traffic Safety. 84.4% of us say texting and driving is completely unacceptable. 36% say they read or text while driving. 27% have sent one. That's 2014. Not a good gap between what we say we believe and how we behave. Not the startling part. Here's the startling part. That behavior's up since 2012. All the PSAs, the public service announcements, all the laws passed. The gap is widening between what we say is wrong and what we do. You guys want to hear the gap that sounds most similar to that to me? Anybody want to take a guess that's here where there's such a gap between what we say we believe and how we behave? Not drinking, we're better at that. What else? Smoking. Every smoker says, this is not exactly a great idea for my health. They do it anyway. Why do they do it? It's addictive. We're going to get to the question of whether it's addictive today, but to get there, I want to tell you a little bit about your brain on computers, about your relationship with computers. And to do so, I'm going to ask you to travel back with me in time. We're going to do a little neuroscience. I want you to picture yourself as a cave person. So the way to do this is very simple. Picture yourself, but hairier. All right? So there you are. This is your forebear tending to a fire. Eons ago, lion comes up from behind, or better yet, let's use this example. The person tending to the fire gets a tap on his or her shoulder from behind. Can the person ignore the tap on the shoulder? No way, I'm getting nodded heads. You guys hopefully live streaming or nodding your heads. Why can't you ignore the tap? Anyone? You got no idea if it's opportunity or threat. And maybe the threat is profound. Maybe it's someone with a spear. Maybe the opportunity is a potential mate. Maybe it's someone with food. Maybe they're warning of a volcano. In the car, here's the analog, driving. Phone rings, proverbial tap on the shoulder from anyone, anywhere in the world. Now, I want to tell you what's happening inside your brain at that moment. When tending to a fire, when driving, you are using this part of your brain. Prefrontal cortex, frontal lobe. I know you guys know this, I'll just go over it briefly. It is the thing that makes us the most human, the most evolved. You can see by comparison other creatures. This is your executive control center. It dictates attention, focus, decision-making. Go down the list. Art, architecture, civilization, all that we are, higher levels, is involved with that. And it's involved with driving, attending to the road, attending to the fire, like the cave person. But when the signal comes, the tap on the shoulder, very roughly, the signal comes from here. This is much more shared with these other animals. The reptilian part of the brain, ancient, comes up and it says, when you have a roar of the lion, lion, run or die. Someone with a spear, turn around or die. When you're in the car and the phone rings, maybe it's your boss, maybe it's your mate, maybe it's a prince from Nigeria who needs money. You take my point. It in effect hijacks that part of your brain. It is a basic primitive thing. Put this down in your brains as point number one, evidence point number one of the ways in which your phone begins to hijack this part of your brain, even against your professed will or your understanding of what's dangerous. Okay, just a quick question that someone will invariably have. Such, will you come up here for a second?
Sure thing, Matt.
Okay, Such. A lot of people will ask, well, why can't I attend to both things at once? Two streams of information.
Okay.
Let's just go through this exercise. Recite A to I as fast as you can.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I.
Well done. That is a Googler for you. Okay. Now 1 to 9.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Wow. Now alternate A1, B2.
A1, B2, C3, D4, E5.
You may sit.
Thank you, Matt.
So look, for those of you keeping score at home or at your desks, you see how much longer it takes. That is an act of switching information streams. It's called switching costs, switching tasks. You guys know these terms, you've heard of them. You're at your desk, you're in your car. To switch among streams of information takes profound neurological energy. Particularly, even when it's something as simple as that. Okay, so now, checklist. Tap on the shoulder, you don't know what it is. Now I've shown you that you can't do two things at once. We're going to speed ahead a little bit. This is the cost, by the way, of ignoring the tap on the shoulder. This is called doing a PowerPoint when you have too much time on your hands. You can find anything on the fancy internet machine. Okay, look, it's not just information that's coming in, it's social information. Social information also is critical at an adaptive or even primitive DNA level. Let me just illustrate by way of example. Let's go back to our forebear in front of the fire. If my buddy in front of the fire puts his hand in the fire and gets it burned and gets blisters and gets an infection and dies and cannot tell me that that's what's happened, I then have to put my hand in the fire and I die, and the species goes with it. Social information is critical. There's a question as to whether it's hardwired into our DNA or primitively adapted, but in any case, we're talking about the Wayback Machine, right? So now it's not just a tap on the shoulder, it's social information that we're programmed to respond to. 1 and 2. 3. One of my favorite pieces of trivia in reading this book, you would say to yourself, if most of the stuff I get on my phone is irrelevant and even counterproductive, spam if you will, wouldn't that condition me not to look at my device? Anyone want to take a stab at this one? Not you, because you've read the book. And by the way, can vouch for the book. Absolutely. An astounding review. Get them while they're hot. Here's why. When you get irrelevant information all the time, you never know when the good piece of information is going to come. This is the same thing that makes what's the gizmo where you pull the... Thank you very much. But I'll make it a more profound example. B.F. Skinner, you guys have probably heard of, Skinnerian psychology, behavioral psychology. Way back when, he does an experiment, rat in a cage. There's a lever in the cage. Rat doesn't know which press of the lever will bring food. So the rat hits the lever all the time. It's called intermittent reinforcement, one of the most powerful lures in psychology. If you'll forgive the comparison of us to rodents, you see where I'm going with this? Intermittent reinforcement, will press lever for food, will hit mouse for food, mouse, rodent, rat. Now I've gone on a terrible tangent. The lure of worthless data. So, the fact that it's irrelevant data doesn't make this less appealing. It can make it more appealing. Tap on the shoulder, a mechanical activity of survival. Social information, the lure of worthless activity. Okay, this one's pretty early in the research, but you guys are familiar with or you've heard of the neurochemical dopamine. It's the neurochemical involved in reward structures, involved in drugs, narcotics. There is some early research that shows that when you interact with your device, in particular video games, you get a little burst of dopamine. So here's how the theory goes on it, and I think we're still working this out. I mean as society. I don't want to go beyond where the research is, but there's some really powerful early research that essentially leads to a hypothesis that you get a little burst of dopamine when you interact with your device. Do you guys know this feeling? A little surge, a little excitement? You get a little burst of dopamine, and then in its absence, you feel bored. So what do? You seek it out. This is a heavy-duty reinforcement cycle at the neurochemical level. And this is a quote from the guy who teaches internet addiction. There's actually a class at a medical school at the University of Connecticut. You see the computer, it's one trigger. Then you sit at the keyboard, it's another. You push the key, you get a result. There's a cascade of dopamine. It's the big kahuna. It's, in a sense, a narcotic. And I just want to add one final thing here when we're adding up these pieces. So we've got dopamine, the tap on the shoulder, lure of worthless data, and the one other. And there's one more here on neurochemicals. Harvard researchers have shown that the sharing of information releases dopamine, of social information. Humans so willingly self-disclose because doing so represents an event with intrinsic value in the same way as with primary awards such as food and sex. So now it's not just getting stuff, it's providing stuff. I hope at this point in the conversation, you're beginning to view your device a little differently than you may have viewed it previously. Yes, it is all the amazing things that we have come to count on. It is a communications device. It is a navigation device. It is an information device. This is not a screed against technology. It is also something else. It is an act of neurochemical activity, habituation, maybe interdependence, maybe codependence. I want to tell you what all this adds up to. I want to give you a theory that I sort of worked with scientists and learned from scientists and added it all up. I want to draw a comparison to the industrialization of food. When food was industrialized, it was, on the whole, a remarkable thing. We tilled the fields, we got the food where it needed to go on trucks and trains, more calories to more people, more survival. No way to argue about that. But at the same time, as we industrialized food, we came up with incredible processes for creating food and calories that can be so seductive as to be dangerous. And I'm thinking of the vending machine. I'm thinking I don't want to pick on Doritos, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. You know, a Dorito actually it's so tasty because it has a concentration of sugar and fat that we crave. You know, but the thing is, in the old days, if you got that concentration of sugar and fat, You climbed over a mountain and went into the cave and killed the woolly mammoth with your bare hands, and by the time you ate that woolly mammoth, you sure needed it. But now you walk down the hallway and hit a button for a quarter, and you've got sugar and fat that can lead in excessive amounts to diabetes and obesity, and we're only learning now the costs. Here's the parallel. There is no doubt that this technology, this communications technology, is so remarkable and amazing and leads to efficiencies and the creation of PowerPoints and talking on FaceTime to grandparents and loved ones. I mean, just forget it. We'll be on the moon soon, on Mars soon. We'll be on the moon. I'm telling you guys. America is getting to the moon. And that's my next book. We will get there. Or, Mars and beyond. There's no doubt. But I want you to begin to think about, as I have begun to think about from talking to these researchers, and I lay out in this context of this harrowing accident mystery, that there is junk food in our midst. And unless we are aware of the way in which this stuff is playing to us, we may well get whatever is the equivalent of obesity and diabetes, which is distraction. So the cell phone meets a deep need for social connection with a greater ease and a greater potential detriment to do it, in the same way that a vending machine that is right down the hall plays to our need for calories. This is from a Yale MD and social media professor. Let me just end with one anecdote. I have a son who's now almost 7, but when he was almost 2, I think, or almost 3, this is not him. He was at his grandmother's house, and I didn't think, his name's Milo, I didn't think he knew that many words. He just kind of would barely put sentences together. And his phone hit I'm starting the whole presentation over. His foot hit one of those little Fisher-Price mobile phones, and it rang. And he picks it up, and I was just so blown away because I didn't know he knew these words, certainly not in this order. And he picks up the little phone, he goes, "I'll call you from a landline." So, let this be our lesson occasionally from the mouths of babes. I'll call you from a landline. Let's have a chat. Cool. And incidentally, you guys, among the things we can talk about are practically what does this mean in everyday life? What are antidotes to it? Anyway, lots of things. Go.
Absolutely. So you alluded towards the end to the angle that I'm most interested in, which is the evolutionary angle.
Yes.
You mentioned junk food. We've got these powerful evolutionary cues for sugar, salts, and fats, and food. Processed food plays right into that. So it occurred to me while you were speaking, imagine if people had jobs where they just had to eat Doritos all day.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, here at Google, what they say is stat. We check more email. Like 7 times more email than the average other tech worker. The number's probably bigger than that. It almost feels like we're paid to eat Doritos all day. What's what's a realistic solution to you?
Well, that's a great point and a great question. And let me just address that briefly in the context of distracted driving as we blossom out. Car issues are not new. Drunk driving, seatbelts. We've worked hard as a society to come to terms with those issues, and there are rules for having them happen. But in those instances, it wasn't the case that there was societal pressure to say, drink and drive. And no one ever told you it was cool not to wear your seatbelt. Maybe one buddy joked with you, you were wimpy, whatever. But that wasn't there is now enormous societal pressure to stay connected all the time. And if you start paying attention to the marketing, as I've documented some in my book, some of the ads essentially say you are uncool if you don't have a signal even on top of Everest. Somehow you are less than if you're not connected. So it goes beyond you're habituated at your desk to you actually are a less than if you're not connected. What's my thought about ways to address it? I actually think some of the companies in the Valley have begun to think about this, including you guys. I did a story a bit about it where you will encourage people to disconnect for the sake of having lucid, cogent, long-term creative thoughts. It's really, really hard to do. We were at lunch with a couple of your colleagues, and we were talking about my writing process. And actually, in retrospect, I said, well, I don't do anything special. I do one thing special. I turn off my phone. You cannot get invested in something. You're going to say you can and you need those streams of information. The truth is, what it behaves as, to a large extent, is a procrastination device. When you're in the middle of something hard that takes the most amount of your energy, will you testify to this? You're nodding. You will easily go look at your phone because, so what to do?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a lot of self-control. I don't think your boss needs to hear from you that quickly. You tell me, I mean, reflect with me. What would happen if you were 15 minutes late on a response?
Interesting. We can hash this out right now, can't we?
Oh yes, your boss is here.
Conveniently. Well, it's a good question, I think, for Googlers. I think it varies team to team. There are roles where you are expected to be on call.
Yeah.
There are some more forward-thinking folks who won't fire you if that's the case. I think it varies. Would you guys agree?
So,
Sure. It's Google. It depends.
It depends. Yeah. ... Okay.
So I think one takeaway for me, I'll speak for me, is understanding the habituation that happens and the feeling of craving that begins to develop. Once I begin to see that that is the better part of my desire to stay on my device, and that it's not actually this desperate need to hear the next message that will be the difference between life and death, I can draw better lines.
Okay.
I mean, it's like, the first step is admitting you have a modem.
Right.
Well, that doesn't really work anymore.
So if I may, I guess what you're saying, I mean, we talk about this as an addiction. And so one common behavior they say, or a sign, am I an addict or not, is the inability to set clear boundaries.
Yes.
You set a line, you're always crossing it. So I guess what you're saying is the first step is just being cognizant. So if you find yourself on the top of Everest and you need to post that on Instagram, or if the phone dings in the car and all of a sudden the road doesn't matter, you have to know what that ding is, you can catch yourself and then think, do I really want to be this person?
Would it be okay to throw in a fun study here to reinforce the risks? Will you guys endure the chocolate cake study? I'll do it quick. I'll make it simple. Researchers do this study where they have some people in a room and they ask them, do you want the chocolate cake or the fruit cocktail snack? But some of the people going into the experiment, into the room, have to remember a string of numbers.
Okay.
To a very statistically significant degree, the people who have to remember the numbers choose the chocolate cake. What do the researchers infer? They infer that when you are juggling information, you make a very different decision. In fact, you make a quote-unquote less good decision. So, what does this have to do with what we're talking about here? There's other research to back this up, a bunch of it in the book, but when you are juggling information on your phone, or when you're juggling two streams or keeping a lot in your head, you actually can't make a good decision about whether to even use your device.
Okay.
It's one of the interesting things about the car example. When you're driving, you're consuming some of this. It makes it hard to decide, should you even answer the phone? There's a bunch of research in here that will show you are more creative. You have better memory. You are better able to learn when you're not using the device. Again, not a screed against technology, but a clarion call, if you will, to say, I can use this to my advantage and I can be the most powerful. It can be a bit of kryptonite if I don't.
Very cool. So let's talk back in the lens of addiction again. You also hear that people who are suffering from an addiction find that moment of clarity when they kind of hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
And so I know you're a parent, there's parents in the audience. Imagine if you're trying to get your kid to stop texting and driving or to put the phone in the trunk while they're driving. Do you find that folks with this sort of tech addiction need to have that moment of clarity? Do you hear people talking about, I was on the top of Everest and I needed my phone out. That's when I realized I had a problem. Because I don't hear those stories about tech addiction. Unfortunately,
a lot of those stories, and some of them are in here, have to do about a car incident.
Okay.
But you know what's... I've had my son or daughter say to me, so you guys know this experience, to take it out of the car, where someone's trying to talk to you and you have your device, you go, it's just one thing I have to do. You know that, right? And you really don't act. I've had my kids, I think more than once, say to me, I think my son said to me, hey, you have kids, you know. And like I'm aware of this. And what happens is when you're in the moment with that device, it is so consuming. It's so terribly consuming that you are blind to everything around you. And you really do feel like you are essential at that moment. Now, I would challenge you guys in a way I perpetually challenge myself, always. How urgent is that thing? How important am I? I mean, I always am finding I'm way less important than I imagine that I might be. So,
Interesting.
I have a quick question, just following up on the cars then. Because you put your cell phone away, but a lot of the new cars have a dash, which is effectively a giant cell phone. Is that not like taking an alcoholic who's driving and installing a keg and beer tap in the front seat of the car?
yeah, I mean, what's your name?
Olivier.
Olivier, that is what a lot of the scientists say today. There's a really vibrant conversation going on, policy conversation going on around the car. And the conversation basically goes like this. The car makers say, people are going to do this stuff anyway. Let's make it, quote unquote, as safe as possible. And the policy folks and the safety folks and the neuroscientists say, you got to be kidding me. There is no safe as possible. They're safe and they're unsafe. And when you look down and when you take your eyes off the road, or even in the case of some of the new stuff where they use holographic, sophisticated optics to project it through the windshield, even when you're looking in the direction of the road, you still have your focus on, say, a notification that says incoming text. What this fits into is this larger conversation, Olivier, which basically says, are we able to draw a stark line and modify some of our behavior, or are we just trying to find more convenient ways to fit it into our lives? Right now, in that junk food conversation, basically, as a society, we are 16-year-olds who just discovered $5 in our pocket and the store is on the corner, has a sale on nacho cheese, and forget about it.
Really quick, so the mic isn't working, so we're just going to repeat the question. So we're talking about a text Sabbath, or taking a Sabbath from technology for a day or more, and trying to see if there's anecdotes of that being effective.
Anecdotes and science. Just a tiny bit of science here. A woman from this area at Stanford did a terrific study with veterans who were suffering PTSD, and I mentioned this in the book. And when they began to do some meditation, which is its own form of Sabbath, they became far less responsive to bursts of external stimulation that might otherwise unnerve them. There's a bunch of other evidence that adds up and seems to suggest those Sabbaths do work. You slow down your thinking, you make a clearer decision, you're not burdening your working memory that I was alluding to earlier. They really do work if you can stick with them, and they need not be I wonder what you would say. You do a lot of backpacking.
To allude to that.
What happens for you when you get away?
It's interesting because I think towards the end of the book, the neuroscientists that you refer to throughout, I think one of them or two of them are talking about they want to find the science behind why stepping out into nature, the outdoors, it actually has a profound effect on people. It's tough. I wonder. It's almost like a reinforcing. Anecdote. You hear so many people talk about the outdoors and nature being restorative. I almost wonder if we expect it before we get there. You kind of have to let yourself experience it, I think. Yeah, but I think it is. I think it is the Sabbath. I think it probably the working memory. These things get to take a break. A lot of the systems get to stop operating at rapid pace.
Yeah. I don't want to overdo the science, but there is stuff in here about research what happens, how you learn and remember better when you let this rest. So. But anecdotally, I will tell you, someone's called me with a story that I'm not prepared to report yet because I need more evidence, but of a young man sleep deprived from playing video games who killed someone on a roadway, and it may be a seminal case in the spirit of this, who was up for 55 hours. I'm not totally clear on the details yet, but other folks at Stanford talk a ton about the costs to sleep, and you've been seeing this blue light stuff. Got to say again, not a screed against technology, just a call to let's understand the power of it. Even driving, and I can't remember the numbers, they're in the book, and they might go up to 12 seconds depending on what you're doing. But when you are looking down, but even when you're not looking down, if you are focused on something else, your brain is elsewhere. Most of the time, let's take the driving context. Let's forget about the working context. Most of the time, you get away with it. we are actually bad scientists in our own lives. This is a very bad sample size. You text and drive, nothing ever happens. You do it 100 times, you go 100% of the time, nothing bad happened. So that means nothing bad will ever happen. Yeah. The problem is, in those instances where you have to react like this, have you guys, anybody here ever been in a wreck due to whatever? So do you remember how quickly that happens? It's almost unbelievable. You can't even remember what happened. You know, someone comes around a corner. It's that instant. And I've heard some terrible stories in the course of reporting this. It's that terrible, terrible, tragic instant when somebody comes across the road where someone swerves and you can't react. And then those milliseconds, or let alone seconds, matter.
Just really quick, somehow the mic isn't picking up. So it was a great question about company culture, and if other companies have programs or initiatives that they've done to try to curb this at all.
I'm going to ask our British visitor. Was it British Telecom? There's a company in Britain that has no emails after 5 o'clock at night, or maybe it's Germany. I can't. Oh, it's a car company in Germany, I think. And you can't. They will say you just can't answer. You can somehow be penalized for it. Surely someone who's watching online will know that. I've seen years ago Intel flirted with no email Fridays for a group of people. You guys have some people doing some really interesting stuff. I've written about it on our front page. Facebook, Twitter had someone talking about meditation stuff. I mean, the truth is, and I'm in this business too, right? I'm a New York Times reporter. When they need me, they need me. But the reality of it is, and you mentioned the self-importance piece, I really would underscore it. As I've reflected a lot, I think we tend to use this stuff much more for our validation, escaping, sense of importance, all that stuff, than our bosses really need us. So I'd urge you to explore, as I am continuing to explore. I am far from terrific at this. Just how urgent it really is. I think it oftentimes can fall to an individual to control it, even as much as we would blame the external culture.
I want to actually piggyback on that. So I was thinking about the evolutionary need for social interaction.
Yes.
So you get the ping. Is it a Facebook comment? Is it a like? Instagram, Twitter? What is it? But I'm also thinking about FOMO, so fear of missing out. A lot of people talk about it in the Valley. So one thing we hear about now is you're sitting at the doctor's office, you're sitting in line, you pull out your phone, even if you're not on email, you're reading new articles. There's a certain fear, I think, for a lot of folks that if you're not up to speed with the times, and it's world events, current events, it's politics, it could be just media and fashion, all sorts of stuff, sports. What about that FOMO? What about just fear of not being in the know? Is that an evolutionary thing as well?
The short answer is I don't know. May I do a longer answer and get weird?
Are we cool with getting weird?
Can I get weird?
Okay. Do I need to step away or?
No. I need you to make animal noises. No, I'm kidding. Not that weird. I think FOMO is an illusion to a large extent. And the weird part of this is I'm willing to go spiritual and existential with you if you want, and I'll do it by way of coming back to Reggie Shaw, the young man who got in the accident. Remember, he had come back from his mission, and I know Reggie very well. This is a very, very intimate book with deep portrayals of people and their thoughts, his family, the prosecutors, the victim's advocate, and in particular Reggie. And the woman that he had coupled with that got him in trouble wound up getting married to someone else. And when he was driving that morning, even at 6:30 in the morning, he was having an essentially meaningless text exchange with another young woman. If I had to ask myself what was Reggie doing, I think Reggie was filling a hole at that moment. He was really struggling. And when I think about FOMO, and I think about what draws us to our devices all the time, I think a lot personally about filling moments, about escaping, about finding stimulation. Think of the challenge just of sitting in line at the grocery store and you go to your device. Think of the challenge of sitting with someone in silence and waiting for an interesting conversation or just getting to know the person in quiet. Think of the discomfort of making quiet okay, your own moments okay. On on the scale of weird and existential and spiritual, I don't think these were ever easy things. I mean, I think that is an endless, not endless, but it's an essential part of the human condition. And part of what we're doing, I think, when we put terms on it, like I'm afraid of missing out, some of that might be true if it's pertinent to your job. Some of it might be rather fear of being in the moment.
I see.
Boom.
We can trademark that. I sense a book about this coming up. I sense a work of fiction, perhaps. Children in the car being a lot more distracting than a text or an email coming in on the phone.
So, I mentioned the spam research, which was one of my favorites. Another one of my favorites, bit of trivia in doing this, was, well, what if I have someone in the car with me? Isn't that also a distraction?
The radio, sure, all these things are distracting.
So all these things. So let's start with the passenger. Passenger turns out to be even a safety advantage. Not a kid, but a passenger, and I'll come to kids in a second, but a passenger says to you, look out, it's raining, modulates his or her voice with the conditions on the road, actually acts as a proverbial second set of eyes. When there are teens in a car with a teen driver, that is a safety disadvantage, the research shows. I don't know when it's an adult driver with, were you a teen father? No, I'm just kidding. So I don't actually know about that piece of it, but let's go to radio, which is another really good question. It turns out that now with being able to map the brain and being able to do lots of cognitive measures, we can begin to see the variability of cognitive distraction from various activities. From the most extreme, which is texting, where you're looking down, you're manually engaged, you're cognitively engaged, to maybe on the other end, which is the radio. The radio, you are, to an extent, cognitively engaged. Less so, though, when talking to somebody, even hands-free, because they can see through mapping the brain how much more of the brain gets engaged, including the visual cortex, because you, in your mind's eye, are picturing the person you're talking to, and the act of interacting with somebody takes up more of the brain. So all of these go to those milliseconds of switching time. Now, if you're like me and you occasionally yell at sports talk radio, I'm not sure where that falls. And I should stipulate here that road distractions have been a problem for a long time. Fatalities have been in the tens of thousands for many years, owing to the largest extent from drunk driving, but to lots of other things. The issue here is whether this thing has become systemic. It's not the occasional look away. It's an activity that 30% of people are doing, and that's just texting, and 90%, 85% say it's completely unacceptable. So we're talking really on a systemic level about orders of magnitude. This is not the occasional bite of a burger.
That's actually an interesting thought about the orders of magnitude. I think when you mentioned this was a landmark case, Reggie's case, the first time we think, definitely in Utah, that somebody was on trial for
Yes.
texting and driving. And there was a question. The research says that it is orders of magnitude more dangerous to text and drive.
Yes.
But the question was, even with orders of magnitude, is it still that dangerous?
Does it qualify as dangerous?
Yeah, so what's your take on that?
I can only give you what the measures are. The measures are by the safety advocates, and let's say it's texting. This is Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, 23 times risk of crash or near crash. University of Utah would put that at 6 times. They would put talking on hands-free at 4 times greater risk of crash or near crash. Now, you say objectively, is that a risk? Here's how I do the math on this. There are in excess of 300,000 serious car crashes a year, serious injury car crashes in the US, and 30,000 plus fatalities.
Wow.
So you're already talking about the most dangerous thing you will do all day. Period. End of conversation.
Okay.
So, yes.
Okay. I'm going to take one quick step back here. I hadn't met you until today, and I read this book, and I knew I'd meet you today, and I was wondering, I wonder if he's going to be one of these guys who's just like, if you ever text and drive, you're crazy, you're going to kill people, it's terrible. And meeting you, it seems like you wrote this book less to chastise people for a potentially very dangerous behavior and more to, I guess, raise awareness. Like, think about, so why did you take up this topic? You've been doing it for a while.
Look, I watched my behavior outside of the car. I mean, you're dead right. This is not an effort to throw stones. And it's actually not the way I like to approach journalism in general. I think issues are complicated. There usually aren't conspiracies. A lot of things grow simply out of the human condition. Wow. And so I watched my own behavior with the phone, and then I watched my own behavior in the car with the phone. And I said to myself, lots of things are at play here. And what's interesting to me about the car, and I said this at the beginning, is it's the perfect place to set this story. Because if we can do it under these conditions, at 55 miles an hour in the freezing rain, when you're a pretty decent guy who would go to his missionary training center president and admit that he has to go home with his tail between his legs, and he's a good guy like many of us are good people, then what does it say about us under other circumstances? So to me, this is an act for myself, for others, to try to understand what is this thing. I think it's fair to say, I've heard this said, and I don't know that I can prove it with numbers to you today, but it's the phone is the most quickly adopted technology in all of human history, by far faster than the book. When that happens, that's not because Motorola and Apple and Verizon tell you to get it. There's no shortage of companies in this country telling you to buy everything, and most of us buy none of it. But many of us have two phones. That is not an accident. That's not marketing. That goes to utility, power, and when it's that big, to me, it goes to the fact that it hits at social primitive wiring, and that's what I tried to explicate here.
Wonderful. My last question, thank you
Yes.
for that. Last one for me. So one thing you do great in this book, among other things, the data and everything, is you really get into the stories behind a lot of the key players in the book. And I was really surprised towards the end. I don't want to betray too much for those who are going to read it soon. You talk about the importance of telling the truth. Yeah. And that was a really powerful, I think, 1 or 2 chapters for me. And I'm curious, it almost seemed, I almost wondered why you had those chapters. You build it up so well. Here's what the value of the truth is. Was it a reminder that we all need to tell the truth to ourselves about our technology use? Why did you talk about the truth?
Yes, is the short answer. I mean, at the end of this book, partly, very nakedly, it was the publisher saying, so what do we do about this?
Of course.
And I didn't want to write a book that was a how-to book, and they knew that well. I believe more than anything, pull back. I believe is not the right sentence there. I love to tell stories. I think it is, it's just a personal passion, and I love to captivate myself as I am doing the task and the reader who is listening. That is a very connected experience for me. So I didn't want this book to suddenly go into a manifesto. The publisher wanted something, and I tried to find the line where I could stay in the spirit of this book, but also explain what happened here that led to change. Because as you'll see if you read this book, that a remarkable thing happened at the end of this story, and I'm not going to give it away. A truly remarkable transformation happened with this character, like no other I've ever witnessed in fiction or real life. And it came from someone confronting himself. And I went and talked to people about the challenge of doing that, because I think it lies at the heart of this. And all the time in my relationship with my device, as I began this thing, talking about your relationship with the device, I have to confront that relationship and all the things it represents. If my wife says, "Did you take out the trash?" and I suddenly find myself checking the Giants score seconds later, I ask myself, why did I just go do that? And naturally the answer is because the Giants need me. It's probably because I'm escaping from a moment of whatever it is, irritability, didn't she ask me that? Something human. So that I'm trying to find the ways in which my device gets in the way of truth.
Wow.
And I'm sorry to be so long-winded. From lunch, I can't help myself.
It's okay.
Hey, I want to thank you guys for coming. I really genuinely appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being here as well, Matt.
Thank you.